What's going on, guys?
Hey, Brian.
How's it going, man?
Good, good.
Good. Good to hear.
Hello.
Hi, Nicole.
Hey, hey.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, Doc.
What's up, Doc?
How's everybody doing?
Doing well.
Good.
Very good.
My clock's saying 7:59. We'll wait a minute or two to see if we get some more folks on here. Right now, I think we've got, according to my computer, showing 11. So wait one more minute.
Hey, Doc. I want you to know you caused me some pain this week.
Good. What I do?
Well, you had Mike Colbert on your show,
Yeah.
and he was talking about Medina, and I don't know that there's another sporting event that like just tore my heart out when we lost at Medina. David Love was my favorite player growing up, and he was a captain of that team, and they went into the singles like up 4. And I was just, and it's one of those events where you watch you put a lot of time into it because it's so long. So
Sure.
I watched it all weekend, and it just tore my heart out when they lost.
Yeah. Well, Mike's been, I guess, on assistant captain 3 times, I think.
Yeah, that was a really cool story. Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, he's a great guy. He's an interesting story. He came to ETSU just kind of as a walk-on and not recruited, and wound up being an All-American, going out on the tour. Won 3 times on the tour, and I think he's made, I don't know, he made over 300 cuts. So, and he's just he's the best guy. He really is. I'm actually going to play golf with him tomorrow. So.
And so he's helping out the team there at ETSU.
Yeah, he does. His son actually is a senior on the team, but he, once he quit playing on the Champions Tour, he wanted to help and give back a little bit. So he is helping.
That's cool.
Yeah. So, and our team's really good. So
I saw you had your head coach on, I think the week before or something.
Yeah, we had Jake on. Jake, interesting because, Jake's from England, and so a little bit different perspective on things. But yeah, good guy. Good guy. Well, why don't we go ahead and get going? My clock says it's 8:01. What I wanted to try to do tonight is to, I know all of you have, read a lot of the, leadership books, Maxwell and Cy Wakeman and Coach Smith and Brene Brown and, those sort of things. But what I wanted to try to do tonight is kind of talk a little bit about, my experiences, my thoughts on leadership, and some of the things that I've picked up over the years being in, a position of, what I've done. So I just think, these are going to kind of be real life type things. And, if you have a thought or a question or anything, just feel free to, just blurt it out or ask whatever. But what I'd like to do, I don't want to keep y'all too long because I know, it's relatively late, 8 o'clock, and I'm sure all of you have worked hard and you've got families and things. So why don't we plan on doing this for 45 or 50 minutes, and then if we need more time, we'll do another one of these either next week or the following week. So that's kind of what I'd like to do. And I guess the first thing, I think that is really important for all of us, who are positioned in leadership, is I think the most important thing that we all have to realize is trust is, the critical piece of being an effective leader. If there's not trust, you got no chance to be an effective leader. And I think we see that all the time, even most recently, and I'm pretty apolitical, but I think in this most recent, election cycle, I think if people are having a hard time with, trust of the candidates, and whether it's, Congress, representatives, senators, presidential, whatever. I think that's something that you kind of see. So trust is the critical piece. And I think there's really two parts to trust. And I think if you keep this in mind, you'll always be successful. One is honest. You've got to be honest. If you're not honest, people aren't going to trust you. So, you've all probably had people who kind of, I don't know if they've lied to you, but they may have represented things to you and things that weren't exactly the way they were. So you start to, you start to just question them and just not sure you really want to be one of their folks, one of their followers, somebody that really is bought into what they're saying. So I think honesty is certainly important. But I think the other thing that sometimes may not be discussed in that is competent. Leaders have to be competent. As you well know, you're not going to follow somebody that you don't think is good at what they do, or you really have to believe that they're competent. They're really good at what they do, because, they're kind of developing this path that you're kind of buying into to, give everything that you got to follow their role. But if you don't think they're competent, if they're not good at what they do, then it's really hard for somebody to trust what they say. If you don't think they know what they're doing and they tell you something, you go, not sure about that. So trust certainly is an important thing. So I think, just kind of starting out with that, I think that's something to always keep in the back of your mind in whatever position you're in. You really need to make sure that, first of all, you're honest, because if you're not honest, some people can, get away with it for a little while, but eventually it comes back to really bite you. So honesty is certainly important, but also competent. You have to have victories. You have to have things that people go, oh yeah, he's really good, or she's really good at what she does, and they want to be part of that. That's one of the things that always kind of drives me crazy with university presidents when they hire athletic directors. So many times you read, they hired so-and-so and so-and-so because they were a good fundraiser. And it just drives me crazy when they say that, and clearly, I understand you have to generate revenues and, you're always looking for new dollars. But the reality of it is you need somebody that can lead a program. You need somebody that can create a vision. You need somebody that can buy in, of the staff, of the coaches, of the student athletes, of the community, of the alums, all those sort of things. So there's a whole lot more to doing that. You have to have somebody that can build the infrastructure so that everything is solid and good. And so, I think that all goes back to being competent. I've known people who are really good fundraisers who really weren't very good at, leading programs or leading people. But, they can go out and, there are some people who are good fundraisers, they're just used car salesmen, to be perfectly honest. So I'm not sure that's really what you want. But that's kind of something that I think, we got to keep in our mind. So trust is the most important thing that you can have as a leader, but that makes up the two components that make it up are honesty and competency. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind. And then I think the next thing you really have to do is you really have to understand yourself. Who are you? Well, none of us are the same. None of us will do things the same way, and that's fine. But I think you really need to know who you are. And, that's one of the reasons we just did this most recent, assignment. I wanted you to look at yourself, where you are today, where you're going to be in 10 years, and kind of really look at yourself. Who are you? I don't know where we are with the final exam. I don't know if it's posted or not yet, but when you see it, that once again will be an exercise on really looking at yourself, some of the things you've done and kind of how you lead. So I think, that's so important. Who are you? What do you believe in? And so as you come into a leadership role, I think, one of the most critical things is you need to know who you are, because you are basically going to, you're going to create the identity of your team, organization, group, whatever it is. So you need to know who you are, but then you need to know what your identity is. What are things that are important to you? So for me, when I, the two programs that I was fortunate enough to, be in charge of at BCU and here at ETSU, I knew exactly what my identity was. I go back to when I was a high school basketball coach, what was going to be the identity of our team, you know? And for me, this is just my nature, you know? I knew we were going to do certain things, you know, first of all, and to me, so many of the things that I do as an athletic director goes back to the time when I was, you know, a coach, you know, high school basketball coach. But the one thing we're going to do when you go into it, and this is our identity that we're going to have in our organization, in our team, in our program, you know, in our staff, you know, we're going to work hard. To me, you know, that's a non-negotiable. Everybody in our department is going to work hard. I believe in that. You know, I'm really bad about, and I admit it. You know, I think, you know, you know, I expect people to work hard. I expect them. It doesn't matter how long it takes. You know, I think work-life balance. People talk about that all the time. To me, you know, that's not really a factor because work as hard as I can is a big part of who I am. So if we have to work, you know, till 8 or 9 o'clock at night to get things done, we're going to do it. If we have to work weekends, we're going to do it. And, you know, so I think that's really important to me that we work hard, that we're willing to invest whatever time it takes to be successful. And so that's a big identity thing for, you know, for me and for the organizations that I'm in. Now, you know, I also don't believe in working just to work. So, you know, I always encourage people, you know, in the summer when we don't have things going on to take time off. Nothing's going on. You know, I encourage people, yeah, take Friday off, you know, take a week off. I don't really care about that. But when we have things to get done in the critical part of the time, we're going to work really hard. I believe in that. I think that's kind of a tenet of the identity that our organizations are going to have. You know, the second thing that I believe in, we're gonna treat everybody with respect and dignity. And that means, you know, nobody thinks they're better than anybody else. We're gonna treat everybody. You know, I think that's really important. I had a coach here at ETSU who basically I eventually had to make a change. It was in one of our high profile sports. And the reality was, you know, it wasn't that I mean, one of the things he didn't do is, and he's a nice guy, a good man, good family man, but I never felt he treated, you know, some people in our department with respect. If you're a GA or if you're a, you know, entry level position, he kind of treated them as if they were, you know, not important, that they were a lesser entity. And to me, that was really offensive, you know? So I eventually had to make a change because that really didn't fit in our identity. And then when we brought in Steve Forbes as our basketball coach, Coach Forbes was just the opposite. He treated everybody, it didn't matter who you were, with respect and dignity. If you know, after a game, if, you know, you went to a restaurant to get something to eat, maybe have a beer or two. I mean, Coach Forbes, and if those young people were there at that bar, he inevitably would buy them drinks, buy them beer, because he knew that they were supporting his program, but also he knew that those folks weren't, you know, making the kind of money that he was. So I think, you know, that was respect, and those young people really responded to that. So I think respect and dignity is critically important. You know, the third thing for me that I feel is important, these are me, you know what I mean? So you guys need to kind of come up with your own. This is what I think is important in our identity and the programs that I've kind of been fortunate enough to lead. You know, we're going to communicate in a very direct and respectful way. When I got to ETSU, nobody would deal with any issues. They wouldn't communicate and they wouldn't deal with anything. It was really frustrating to me because if there was an issue, they would just kind of ignore it, or they just kind of gloss over the issue. They wouldn't communicate. And then what would happen is they kind of build up these barriers to getting anything done because there was no communication. And then every once in a while, you'd have a situation where when things got bad enough, you'd have people blow up and get into these crazy arguments and really disrespectful to one another. And I'm just going, man, this is just not right. We need to communicate, you know, in a direct way, but in a respectful way. So that was the third thing. And then the fourth thing is that everybody's going to be held accountable, including myself. We're going to hold everybody within our department accountable. I think that's really important, that everybody is held accountable, and everybody needs to know that they're going to be held accountable. If you don't hold people accountable, then I think you really start to lose a lot of the people's motivation, because they say, well, I'm busting my ass, I'm working hard, here's this individual over here, he or she's not really doing their job, and nobody cares. Why should I bust my ass if this person's, they're not doing much of anything, and nobody seems to care. So for me, that was really, really important, that everybody's going to be held accountable. And the other part of that is that everybody knows what their responsibilities are, because sometimes in any organization, if you don't really know what your responsibilities are, it's pretty hard to hold people accountable for that, So I think those were the four things that, really helped both at VCU and here for us to shape our identity. And that's the first thing you got to do. I mean, people talk a lot about culture and identity. They talk more about culture than identity. And I think the difference between culture and identity is, you have to have an identity early on. And I think as you develop your identity and you get people to buy in, and that gets to be, the standard of how you operate, then you start to build that culture. And once you create that culture where people kind of understand exactly what the expectations are, then, that's when you're really starting to make some progress. And that's where your organization or your team or your group or whatever it is really going to make some progress. So I think those are really important things. It's kind of funny because, when I talked to, Coach Forbes, and, Steve was certainly very successful. He talks about identity. What's the identity of our team? Well, we're going to do a couple things. We're going to share the ball. That's one of the things that he talked about from the very first time he met with the team. We're going to grab every ball with two hands, whether it's a rebound, whether it's a pass, whether it's a loose ball, we're going to grab them with two hands. So, that starts to develop that identity. And then eventually, as they work hard, they do certain things, then they create the culture. So I think when you go into this, you need to know what the identity is of the organization that you want to lead. So I think that's really important as you move forward in your world and what you're doing. So I'm going to stop for a second. Anybody got any questions about that? Thoughts, experience that you have you'd like to share about something like that? Things you've seen that have been good, bad, about identity of you've been in an organization where you've seen people that really doesn't have an identity. They just kind of wander around. Any thoughts?
Well, Doc, I guess I'll go since I'm the elder statesman of the group.
Yeah, great.
First, as I listen to you talk about your identity, it seems like there are more personal values or values that you tried to instill within the department. Would that be correct?
Exactly. That's what, for me as an individual, those are my own personal things. You know what I mean? People may have different things. That may not be what, their personal, what their personal value system is. But for me, that was important because, once again, I say all along that, my whole leadership style goes back to being a coach. And
sure.
For me, those were the things that were pretty important as a coach. We're going to play hard. You know what I mean? We're going to be together. We're going to communicate. We're going to hold people accountable. If you don't do your job, you're going to be made aware of that. So, and we're going to treat people with respect. You know what I mean? And then we'll get on you and make you do the right thing. But it's going to be one that you understand. We're trying to make you better. So yeah, those are the things that are important. Exactly.
So along the same lines, when you went to hire people, whether they were coaches or staff members, whether it was, at VCU or prior to that, did you look for similar values in those people? Were you able to pull that out of them or not?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's a really, really good question. Yeah, I think intuitively the answer is yes. I'm not sure I ever really thought about it that much. I mean, I'm really a bad one to talk about hiring. you know, I was really fortunate, but there were people that for some reason or another that just connected with me and just knew they were going to work. And if I really had to go back and think, like when I hired Jeff Capel or Anthony Grant or Steve or, Paul Costin, people like that, Paul Keys, I just knew that that's the way they were, that they were hardworking people, and we had this connection and they would buy in, and we had this great relationship, and I think I knew that they really wanted the same thing that I wanted. I think that was probably it. They knew, I mean, the reality of VCU, maybe y'all don't know much about VCU. VCU may be the most urban institution in the country. We had, I don't know, 25,000 students on 30 acres in downtown Richmond. So, it wasn't like a lot of, traditional colleges. So many of the students were part-time students. A lot of them were night school. There was no tradition, no history. And so I think for me, this kind of were people who kind of knew that and were willing to, kind of had a little bit of a chip on their shoulder and willing to work hard and knew that it wasn't going to be easy and they were going to do what was necessary for us to win. And so I think that was a big part of it. We weren't, it wasn't glamorous, you know what I mean? I think that's it. So one of the things that I always seem to appreciate, and I don't know why it is, but, for me hiring, I really like to hire people that I thought had really worked hard and earned their way. It wasn't a silver spoon in their mouth. It wasn't, because, Dean Smith had called me and, or they were at the University of North Carolina, or they were this or that was it. Like when I hired Anthony Grant was a high school coach for 10 years. And then eventually he got a chance to go to Marshall I think he went to Stetson for a year, and then he went to Marshall with Billy for 2 or 3 years, and Billy got the job at Florida and he went there. But this wasn't a guy who had all these people opening doors for him, and that was something that I kind of always looked for, people who had really worked hard, who had figured out how to be successful without somebody doing everything for him. Forbes is another example. When Steve came here, Steve was a junior college coach for 11, 12 years. He didn't have anybody opening doors. He just worked and worked and worked, and eventually, went from junior college to Idaho, so you must really want to get into Division I if you go to Idaho in the winter. So just kidding. But, and then he went to Illinois State, and then Louisiana Tech, then A&M, then Tennessee, and then he got into trouble. He didn't get into trouble, but Tennessee got into trouble, and Bruce Pearl got into trouble, and he was impacted by that. He had to show cause. He couldn't coach in NCAA, so he had to go to junior college. Went there. He didn't bitch. He didn't moan. He didn't whine. He went there. He went to Northwest Florida. Had the #1 team in the country for 2 consecutive years. Then went to Wichita. So to me, that was really attractive. So I mean, those are the kind of people that I kind of always gravitated to when I hired people that had worked hard, who had figured it out, and were comfortable and wanted to be part of what we were doing. Not somebody that just, oh, well, here's a job. So that was kind of it. People had kind of figured it out. One of the guys who's probably the best coach, I've ever hired is a guy named Paul Costin, who was our tennis coach at VCU. Paul's probably won 1,200 matches in his career, but he was at Arkansas Little Rock when I hired him, and they had no resources, they had no funding. I mean, he had to do everything, and yet, hugely successful. So, that was somebody that, really was attractive to me. So I don't know if I answered the question, but, for me, that was kind of the things that I really looked for when I hired those people that really wanted to work hard, that understood it was going to be tough, and we were going to have to pull together and figure out a way to make this work.
You definitely answered the question, because I think intrinsically, as you said, you were hiring people that shared very similar values to you. It just may not have been in the discussion. And so, and I think we talk more about values in the last 10 to 15 years than we ever have. And so even prior to that, you probably really didn't talk in specifics of value. So thanks, I appreciate it.
Yeah, I think that's right. Sometimes now we've kind of labeled some of these things, you know what I mean? But I think probably, like you said, Jim, 15 years ago, we kind of did them, didn't know exactly why we were doing them, you know what I mean? But we were doing them because we did have that value system, and we kind of realized what we were trying to do, but it wasn't as defined, maybe,
Right.
So I think that's exactly right.
Okay.
That's
Thanks,
exactly.
Doc.
Surely. Anybody else got anything they want to throw in here? Well, let me go on, so I think, once we get to that point, I think the first thing then at that point, the one thing as a leader you've got to understand to be really successful is, what is the mission of the organization? What is the mission? And me, I guess I kind of get this because, I had the experience of being in the Army. So, after I graduated from college, I took RTC. So I went in the Army for 2 years. And when you're in the Army, and, I was a lieutenant in the Army, the one thing they talk about all the time is mission, that's your major focus, your mission. If your mission is to take that hill, you take it. You know what I mean? You do whatever you need to do to take that hill. If you're a artillery officer, your mission may be to, blow up this, this bunker or whatever. So you kind of really focus on that. So for me, I guess that's always affected me in my leadership. What is our mission, And as an athletic director, as a college athletic director, the one thing to me, both at VCU and at ETSU, the one thing that was easy for me was to determine what was our mission as an athletic department. And I always felt our mission as an athletic department was to do whatever we could to make the university, the best university that it could be. How could we elevate the university? That was the only purpose we had to be in existence as an athletic department, was to make the university better, to make the university succeed, to build the brand of the university. So for me, that was always kind of the mission or the guiding principle that I always thought about. So no matter what happened in our programs, both at VCU and ETSU, you always come back to, how is this going to make this university be more successful? And, of course, how do you do that? Well, you win games, you get national recognition, you have student athletes graduate, you do great things in the community, you recruit more students to the institution, you make the quality of life of, the students on campus better, you make the quality of life of the region better. So all of those things come in there, but that's really what we're trying to do, is to make, the university meet its mission that much better. So to me, whatever your organization is, you need to understand what the mission is. Maybe if you're a church, maybe the mission is to, serve your congregation in a way that, souls are saved, or whatever you want to say. So, I think that's the one thing, whatever it is, whatever your organization is, what is your mission? If you're a basketball coach, once again, is your mission. What is your mission? You're only there to make that institution that much more successful. So how do you do that? If you're doing something that detracts from that, then you're not meeting the mission. I think I'm talking too much. I'm getting hiccups. But I think that's really, really important. Understand what your mission is. And so I think that's something we always have to keep in mind. And so if you're ever in a situation as a leader and you have to make a hard decision, I think what you want to do is use that criteria. How is this going to help us meet our mission? And, a lot of times, it's hard to make decisions, Jim, from your experience, and all of from that experience, when you're in a leadership role, it's hard to make decisions. But if you use one of the criteria, how is that going to help us meet our mission? Then I think, the answers a lot of times become a lot more clear. So kind of think about that, you know? So that's one of the things that I kind of really wanted to emphasize. And then, you know, some things I think, you know, realities of being a leader. Okay. And I'm talking about this in a lot of ways because, you know, an athletic director, that's kind of what I do. That's what I've done. But I kind of got about 6 or 7 things here that I just want to make sure that everybody realizes as a leader. Okay. The first thing is, you know, if you're in a leadership role, and, you know, once again, I'm relating as an athletic director, you know, you have a significant amount of power. Okay. If you're a boss, if you're a department head, if you're a director, whatever it is, you do have a significant amount of power. You're going to make decisions that affect people's lives. Don't take that responsibility too lightly, you know. Don't have a short memory where you forget where you came from and some of the people that were, you know, your leaders and how they acted. So remember that feeling of where you came from, but you do have a significant amount of power. One of the most distasteful things, you know, and I've seen it, you know, people, you know, pretty good, they're moving along pretty good, and then they get an opportunity to be, in my world, an athletic director, and they change dramatically. All of a sudden they become big timers, what I call big timers, people who really think they're important. Now all of a sudden a lot of the people that maybe, you know, they worked with or whatever they knew, now they're a little bit too important for that. So number one, when you're in a leadership role, don't ever get to that point where, you know, you think you're really important. And let me just tell you, power is intoxicating. It really is. You know, you really need to be careful about that. If you're in a really significant leadership role, power can be intoxicating. It can make you feel really important, you know, because you're making big decisions. People kiss your ass. I mean, they'll play up to you. They'll try to make you feel like you're important because you do have power. So don't let that change who you are. You're the same person that you were when you got that job or when you got that opportunity or when you got that leadership position. So don't change, okay? So leadership, you will have power. Don't forget that, okay? A second thing that you need to know in a leadership role, you know, it's kind of, I always kind of laugh, you know, probably the best job when I was at Memphis State, you know, I was associate AD and I was kind of like the number 2 person in the department. Well, you know, that was a great job because you're never scrutinized, you know. Once you get to be the athletic director, everybody's scrutinizing you. They're looking at everything you do. They really want to make a decision. Every decision you make, you know, somebody will say, yeah, that was a good one. Somebody will say, no, that was a bad one, whatever it is, you know. And Dr. Nolan, you know, our president of ETSU, he kind of laughs when he came to, you know, when he came to Johnson City to become president of ETSU, he said, you know, one of the amazing things was, you know, you'd go to the grocery store and in your grocery cart, people would be looking in your grocery cart to see exactly what you bought. You know, so I think, you know, that's something you have to realize. When you're in that position, you're going to be carefully scrutinized. Everything that you do is going to be in public view. So don't forget that. That's, you know, that's one of the trade-offs for being in these leadership positions. Yeah, it's great to be a leader, but also realize you're going to be scrutinized. Things that you may not even have anything to do with, you're going to be scrutinized. Okay. A third thing is, you know, people take cues and clues from you. So you may say something and people are going to take a cue from that. You know, they're going to have an idea or a feeling or some impression that you may or may not, you know, really have ever communicated, but they're going to take cues from you. You know, body language, everything that you do, people are going to be watching you and they're going to take cues from you. It's really interesting. You can have a frown on your face and you can hear, I mean, I know I may be in a meeting as an athletic director and somebody says something, I get a frown on my face and it's amazing. There may be people in the meeting then that automatically will kind of, you know, indicate that they don't agree with whatever was said. Now, they may or may not have before I made that cue and had a frown on my face, you know. I may have had a frown on my face because I thought about, you know, a golf shot I hit out of bounds or something, but they're going to have, cues. You're going to be very, very watched. Okay. So make sure that everything that you do, if you go out and, have too much to drink or something like that, those are cues that people are going to take from that. They may say, okay, well, that's okay. Then, that's kind of the expected behavior. So make sure you understand that you can really impact a lot of folks just from the cues that they take from what you do or say. And then the fourth thing is, as a leader, you can't be everybody's friend. Okay. If you're trying to get to a position where everybody likes you, and that's kind of, what you're trying to do, then, it's going to be a tough road, because you can't make everybody like you. You can't make everybody happy. That's just not going to happen. Being the athletic director, being the leader is not a popularity contest. It's about doing the right thing. And you have to make those decisions that are, once again, best for the organization. It's best for, the team, the program. How is this helping us meet our mission? So don't think when you're a leader that everybody's going to like you. Sometimes, like I said, when I was associate AD at Memphis State, everybody liked me because, I kind of didn't ever really have to make too many decisions. But, once you're at VCU or ETSU, you've got to make the decisions that's best for everybody. Sometimes, you have to make those hard decisions. You have to make changes in coaches or in staff. You may have to terminate somebody that is a good friend of, somebody on the board. Well, hey, I tell that story. I think I've told that story before about when I hired Paul Costin, the people who had given us the money for the tennis center, the Tallheimer family. They wanted me to hire a guy who had been a good college player at SMU and had played on the tour a little bit, really was a hitting partner for some of the guys. And, but he had never really coached in college. And, Paul Carlson had won a NAIA national championship and did it with no resources from an inner city school like VCU. So I hired Paul, and they just went crazy. They were, we'll never do anything for VCU. We'll never give them another cent. And, and they had been, the wife had been, she had been the chairperson of the capital campaign. So you go, well, that's a tough decision, but I got to do what's right for the program and for the organization. And, then you do that. And then in a month, Paul and the Tallheimer family were best friends in the world. So, it just, but don't expect every decision for everybody to just think you're the greatest person in the world. And then kind of going along with that, making difficult decisions goes with the territory. Sometimes you got to make difficult decisions. Right now, with COVID and what's going on with coronavirus, how tough is this to make these decisions? It's kind of interesting to me. I'm going to ask y'all a question. I want to get a response from you. So here we are. Let's say we're at good old ETSU, and we've taken a pretty serious financial hit because we have no revenues from playing football. Our marketing rights holder, we were supposed to generate or get about $1 million, but because we're not playing any games, we're not getting any marketing rights revenues, so we're about $3 million short. Okay. Now, what would you do? Here we have our tennis and golf teams who can play because, they're outside. Everybody's kind of playing golf and tennis these days. But because because of the financial situation, what would you do if you had to put 5 people on furlough so that, you recoup those salaries, or, not let the tennis and golf team play their fall season? What would you do?
Are you saying choose between the two?
Somebody answer. Come on, Mitchell, what would you do?
I mean, it's tough. I mean, because you have to look at a lot of different variables that go into it. Like you were talking about with your earlier story, if there's some kind of support where it could be something with a long-term benefit with different donors, it could be worth keeping that tennis side of it. However, if basketball is that main side of it, and it's also going to be your long-term generating revenue, it's just a matter of which outweighs the, and it's hard because there's not backstory or anything more information to it, but you just have to weigh the cost of it in the sense of what's more important in the short term as well as the long term.
Okay. Katie Little Zink, I see you on there. What do you think about that, Miss Katie?
Can you hear me? Can y'all hear me okay?
Did you hear my question? Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. I think Jada would agree with me. I hate to be so shallow, and I speak from my own experience. I mean, I have a boss above me. They could furlough me in a heartbeat. I get that. So I'm speaking from my own opinion. I would pick furlough. And why I said Jada would agree is just like the kids need something to look forward to. If we keep telling them over and over again, sorry, you're just going to sit here and do nothing, then they're going to start trying to find a school that is playing. And at the end of the day, in athletics, they are athletics. They are the people. They're the ones that we're all working for in the first place. So you have to appease them in order to even have them in place to appease the donors and whatnot. So like if you lose your big people that give you the wins, then you're going to lose the donors too. So I would have to pick furlough.
Okay. How about you? Somebody else? JD. So Katie was talking for you. You talk for yourself.
Yeah, so Doc, let me make sure I got this right. You said you've got to furlough 5 people. What's the decision that you make, correct?
Yeah, I mean, either we'll let the golf team and the tennis team play 2, golf team can go to 2 tournaments, the tennis team can go to, 3 competitions, or we need to save, let's say, $150,000 for them to do that. The only way we can do it is to furlough, some folks.
Yeah. So the first thing I'm looking to do, Doc, is I'm looking to see if I can reallocate my staff to another position. So is there somewhere on campus that I can reallocate them so that they can get work, continue to work, and we can figure out finances that way while they're on furlough, they're still making money. If that opportunity doesn't work, then just trying to think if there's any other way that I would approach this. I think when I would go to furloughs, I think I would have to go to assistant coaches first. We need those head coaches on staff, especially for coaching purposes, recruiting purposes. That's the face of the organization. So that would be the second thing that I would look at.
Yeah, I mean, from my standpoint, everybody's got a different opinion, and everybody's got something that they're going to base this decision on. To me, I mean, I think that's what we're in the business to do, is to give our athletes an opportunity to compete. That's the only reason we're in business. So if we're not going to let them compete, then what are we doing here? You know what I mean? And while, you hate to make these hard decisions of having, furloughing a person for a week, and I know that's going to affect their family and those sort of things. But I think the reality of it is, what are we in business to do? We're in business to provide our students, athletes, for an opportunity to have these experiences. So to me, I think that's where you need to go with this. But that's just, that's a hard decision. Those are the kind of decisions that you're going to be faced with in a leadership role. So hard decisions are something, that are going to happen. So, realize that, and I'm sure all of you had to make some hard decisions, but as you go up the leadership ladder, the decisions become, more, more impactful for more people. They become much more widely discussed. So kind of keep that in mind. You will have to make hard decisions. So, you kind of need to be somewhat tough-skinned and have the confidence to move forward with that. And then, another thing, when you're in a leadership role, you're going to have things that happen that are very difficult incidents, So for me as an athletic director, I've been so fortunate, so blessed. And, I was AD at VCU, 22 years, and here 5 years. So that's 27 years as an athletic director, and had very few of these. But you will have situations that arise that are very difficult from the standpoint of you get a call at 3:00 in the morning that, the point guard on the basketball team just got arrested for drunk and disorderly downtown, or, your number one tennis player just got arrested for shoplifting, taking a, bracelet from, a jewelry store, or, I've had incidents, I had a player, we had a player drop dead in the middle of the night I'll never forget it, January 1st. Our team came back to practice, our basketball team, and he dropped dead about 6 minutes into the practice session. It was really, really difficult to deal with. So then at that point, you as the leader, you're going to have to be the source of strength for everybody at that point. When the young man's name was Michael Brown, he dropped dead. I mean, there needed to be somebody that was there, that was strong, that could really create a plan. How are we going to deal with this? What are we going to do for grief for the players? Are we going to play the next game? How are we going to deal with the funeral? How are we going to, get our team? This kid was in Portsmouth, Virginia, to get our team down to Portsmouth. His family wanted Michael to be born in a VCU basketball uniform. How are we going to do all these things? So there are times when you have very difficult situations that occur, and you as the leader, you're going to have to be the person that really sets the course and be the person who is the source of strength for everybody else, because they're all looking to you to be that person. So that kind of goes along with being a leader. That's something that's very real, and then, one of the other things that, you're going to have to realize is that sometimes, you're going to have to make hard personnel decisions. You may have to fire people. The hardest thing, I think in my whole time as being, an athletic director, is to make a decision where you have to terminate somebody, because they're just not getting it done. But once again, it kind of goes back to what I said earlier, everybody's got to be held accountable. And for us, when I fired Murray Bartow here at ETSU, and Murray was a good man, it had some success early, but the program was just stuck in the mud. It was just not going anywhere. Attendance in the last 3 years, it just dwindled, just continuing to dwindle. There was no energy. There was no enthusiasm. There was no excitement. So you go, where are we going with this? And he was not, Murray was not somebody that was good in the public. He didn't like being out in the public. We were just losing all the energy that we had, that, was out there. And, ETSU basketball has really always been kind of a rallying point for all of Northeast Tennessee. And yet it just it was just, really bad. So as much as you hate it, and, I tried to do things, early on, when I got here, for example, I wanted him to succeed. I tried to help him succeed. For example, I had, we basically bought 3 home games. And, as everybody knows, your chances of winning games in basketball are greatly enhanced by playing at home. So we spent $150,000 to buy 3 home games. So we brought in Marshall, Stephen F. Austin, and Samford, and we won all 3 games the year before. So, those 3 games were critically important. In the past, before I got here, one of the things that ETSU did, which I changed pretty quickly, was that ETSU would basically fund a lot of their programs by basketball going to play these guarantee games. So basically the year I got here, and I came in January, the year I got here, the team was like 1-8, but they had played, I don't know who all they had played. They had played North Carolina. They were getting beat. And plus they weren't any good to start with. They had at the beginning of the season, I'm telling you more stories than you need to know, but the 2 starting point guards both got kicked off the team and arrested for being, for lack of a better term, drug pushers, So they got arrested, got thrown off the team. Another kid, another relatively good player, was ineligible because he didn't pass enough classes. So they weren't any good, but they had all these games scheduled to generate revenue. They played North Carolina. We were losing 38-4 at half. They played Georgia. They were getting killed. They played, I don't know who all else they played, but they were like 1-8. But one of the things that was a part of it, which kind of drove me crazy, is they had developed a contract for Bartow that basically the guarantee was the first, I think it was $125,000 went to the athletic program to help fund stuff. The next $125,000 went to Coach Bartow as a financial stipend. I'm going, and then anything over that, they split 50-50. I'm going, this is the craziest thing I've ever heard in my life. They're paying the coach to lose games, not to win games. So we kind of changed the contract and said, we'll pay you to win games. We're not going to pay you to lose games. You know what I mean? So then we went out and we did. I was able to get those guarantee games. But there at the end, we just didn't win enough games. The program still continued to flounder, and you just have to make that decision. So, it's a tough deal, but that's part of leadership. That's very, very difficult. That is very, very difficult. So you kind of got to understand that as we move forward, just how difficult decisions about personnel are, so, but once again, like I said earlier, one of the critical pieces is everybody, you really need to make sure that everybody understands, what the expectations are for them. If people don't understand what that expectation is and you don't agree and you've never had communication and conversation with individuals and they don't know what it is, it's pretty hard to hold them accountable and do anything. So make sure that everybody that, you kind of work with and is in your, in your organization in a position that kind of reports to you, that they know exactly what their responsibilities are, what they're going to be held accountable for, and what your expectations are, and you agree to that on the front end. So that's some of the stuff that I think is really important. And then finally, the last thing we'll talk about tonight, I think is really important is as a leader, one of the things I feel is critically important is you have to really be somebody who can aggregate data. Okay. And what I mean by that is you really need to have as much information as possible. You need to know as much as you can. You need to really, really understand how things work. Who's doing what to whom, where is everything. You need to know everything that you need to know. And so you as a leader, I think, you really need to work hard at that. And for me, I think there's really three ways to do that. I think the first one is observation. You really need to watch. You really need to watch people. You need to watch the way they act. You need to watch the way they interact. You need to watch, do they come to work on time? Do they leave early? Are they really doing work? Or are they just, hanging around the water cooler bullshit? When I got to ETSU, there was a guy there who was the chief fundraiser. And, his major deal was they'd go in his office and somehow or another, he had one of those Pop-A-Shot machines in there. And I'd walk in there and he'd be playing this Pop-A-Shot game. And I kind of go, what is this? And then some days you'd walk in there, he'd be sitting in his desk, and this was the guy who was supposed to be the chief fundraiser. He'd be sitting in his desk with his feet up on the, on one of the drawers playing a mandolin. And I'm going, what are we doing? You know what I mean? What are we doing? And I had to call him in and say, what are you doing? So, I think, those are things you kind of watch. At first couple times you see it, you go, okay, well, maybe, I don't know. But then when it got to be, just this ongoing, strange way of, doing your job, it just wasn't going to work. But I think as you watch people, and I think good leaders really have a feel for people. They understand them. They really get to know what that person is really, what they really are, who they are, what they believe in. Do they really fit in? I've had people who work for me who, were they great? No. Were they awful? No. And when you work in higher education and something like that, sometimes you have to try to manage those people and get the most out of them that you can, because you just can't get in and make wholesale changes. But really watch. And so this guy, some of the people try to bullshit you and act like they're doing stuff and play games. But if you watch, just be very observant. Watch everything. See how they interact. That's really important too. Sometimes I think it's really interesting how, for me as the athletic director, people would engage with me in one way, but then you'd watch them engage with somebody else that might have been, at a lower level or something, and they had a completely different way of dealing with those people. So just watch and make sure that you do that. And then I think the second thing is you really need to talk to just about everybody. When you're a leader, really take time to get to know those people, talk to them, ask them questions about themselves, about, what they believe in, what they think is important, who is, it's really interesting sometimes to ask people who's the most important person in this department, and it's interesting to hear what kind of responses you get. What can we do better? Get that information from those people, and you'll get a feel for the people that are whiners or complainers, or people that always, nothing's ever right. And then you'll get the people who are generally have a concern and generally have an idea. For me, I kind of put people into two categories. I have people who are problem solvers, and I have people who are problem creators. And, I'm always looking for the problem solvers, Don't come to me. I mean, I've had people who worked for me who always come to me with a problem, and they wanted me to solve their problem. And after a while, maybe don't fall into that trap where I think Cy Wakeman actually talks a little bit about that. Don't fall into that trap where you're doing their job as the leader. Maybe you can help them and guide them a little bit. But, if you start to solve all their problems, they'll just dump everything on you. So, make sure you talk to people and make sure that you really get a feel for what they're thinking, what's important to them, and if I were you, as you get people, make a list of questions to ask people so that you can get input. And then, hopefully as you talk to people, there'll be common threads that kind of tie everything together. Well, it's just not one person saying this. There must be an issue here. So get those questions, put together, a list of questions that you really want to kind of get answers for all the people that are in your purview. Okay. So that's the third thing. And then the other thing I would recommend is, do research, go back and look at things, see exactly, what has been successful in the past, what has not been successful in the past. Why was in 1983 through 88, why was the athletic department really successful? And then from 92 to 95, it just kind of fell flat. What happened? Why did that happen? There could be a zillion different reasons why it happened. Maybe, the state cut funding to the athletic department, or, the basketball coach left and made a bad hire with the next basketball coach, whatever it is. But do research and find out exactly why things are. Don't assume anything. Take the time to really do the research and background work to understand your organization, the history, the tradition, everything that's gotten there. Some people come in and, they don't have any respect for the past. Well, the past kind of can give you a good indication of, where you are right now and how you can really succeed. So those are some thoughts that I have. And like I said, I don't want, we're already in an hour. So I don't want to talk too much more, but I just kind of wanted to share those things with you. And then, maybe we'll have one more of these Zoom sessions where, we can talk and just kind of share general ideas. So I just wanted to kind of have this session, talk to y'all, and also encourage you. I know right now we're at the end of the semester. I know my class, you've done really good stuff in my class. I appreciate all the good work you've done. You've got a couple more things to finish off. So finish off strong. I know Dr. Hall's class is, Mike's a great teacher. I hope you've enjoyed him. He's a smart guy, good guy. So I hope, the strategic planning class has kind of gone somewhat hand in hand with this class. So that was kind of the strategy behind why these were the first two classes. Did anybody have any questions about anything?
Real quick follow-up question on the mandolin Pop-A-Shot guy.
Yeah.
If he was an elite performer, like above average, would you let him pop a shot and play that mandolin?
I hate to say it. Yeah.
Okay. I figured.
I would, you know what I mean? So, it unfortunately wasn't, you know what I mean? But,
right.
But yeah, I'm pretty result oriented. So everybody does things differently. He may be busting his ass from 6 a.m. till noon, or he may every night go out and meet with donors from 5 o'clock till 10 o'clock. It may have just been a way to relieve that, but I can tell you he wasn't, but that's a great question. That is a really, really good question. I think, it's just, like I say, so many things I relate to coaching, if a guy, if he's it's kind of funny, I was a basketball coach. So one of the best players I ever coached in high school he was left-handed, and he was kind of, he was shooters, what I hate with shooters are thumbers, what I call thumbers, you know what I mean? Because, he was a left-handed shooter, but he pushed with his right thumb too, which I think is a really, technically bad way to shoot a basketball, you know what I mean? And he'd shoot it, when he shot it, it was a dead knuckleball, it didn't spin at all, which, everybody will tell you those are bad characteristics of a shooter. But he made a bunch of shots. So, yeah, he had done it so long, he was really good, so you just go, oh, okay, hey, don't argue with success, So I think, I think that's right. I think not everybody's the same. Some people get the job done. And like I said, if the expectation was, here's what we need to do if we need to raise $1 million and you're raising $1.2 million, I don't give a shit if if you stand on your head and, play a kazoo, you know what I mean? If you can raise the money, then, it works for you, so, yeah. So that's my answer. I think that's practicality, Anything else? I think we'll, I know we're recording this. So last time I messed it up, we didn't record the last Zoom with Mike Smith. I feel bad about that. Oh, excuse me. That was my fault. But, so this one will be recorded. I'm going to post it on the news when I figure out how to do that. So if you want to go back and look at it, that'll be there. Okay. Anybody got any questions about the assignments or anything before I choke to death here with the hiccups?
Is there a time limit for the video, the leadership video? Is
No.
there a time that you're looking for this, how long this explanation to be?
Just be good. Good. Just like that last question. If you can get your point across in 20 seconds, and it's great. Right on. Anything else, folks? Well, like I said, I've enjoyed working with y'all. I think you're all doing a good job. Just continue to push through this next couple of weeks. I know there's so many issues for all of you with, the virus and, fitting these things into your schedule and doing things, but you're doing a really good job. So keep it up, and, these classes will be over, and then you'll have a little bit of time off, and we'll have it. I think you probably have one class over the intercession, but we've tried to make those classes such that, they won't be killers. So that's kind of what I know. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Doc.
Great seeing you guys.
Thanks, Doc.
Hey, if I don't see you, have a great Thanksgiving, okay?
Yeah, you too.
Thanksgiving,
You too,
Doc.
for sure.
Oh, and if you don't have anything to do, we're doing lunch with Doc Friday. Tune in, okay?
Is that on your podcast, Doc?
No, this is just, I'll get Cheryl to send out, we do this like every other Tuesday or every other Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. So I'll get, Cheryl to send something out to you, a link to what we're doing, okay?
Okay.
Yeah, but our podcast, I just did a podcast yesterday with John Smoltz. It was really interesting. So Smoltz, you baseball guys will like to hear what John had to say.
Is that a from the locker room one?
Yeah, it'll be from the locker room. So Coach Smith and I did it with Smoltz. We've got a couple out there we haven't posted yet. John's, we did one with Seth Greenberg. We've done one with President Nolan. I don't think we've posted the one from Wade Phillips yet. And we did one with Gene Chiswick. So we got about 5 or 6 in the can that'll go out here in the next probably 2 to 3 weeks. So, yeah. So if you can watch those, I think they're pretty, I don't know if they're good. I know I'm not good. Coach is pretty good, and people we have on is good. So, I think there's some good points in there. So, appreciate y'all.
Yeah.
Thanks, Doc.
Nicole, Coppin State, even more inner city than VCU, huh?
Yeah, I listened to Doc and I'm like, we sounded like cousins because my guarantee is at about 650 to 750 just for the men.
Wow.
That's their guarantee. They come home 0-18 before we start conference.
Yep. Yep.
Gotta get that money somehow, unless you got a Javante on your staff.
I know, right? We gotta get one.
I was listening to some of his comments about fundraisers. I was like, I'm not a Carson. I build relationships.
That is our fundraising arm. The men go out and play these games. And we had a couple of upsets. We beat Loyola last year with what was her name? Sister Mary with the striped scarf.
Oh, yep. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, we went out to California and got that win. That was huge. We celebrate those like we won the Super Bowl. You would.
Oh, heck yeah. Yeah, I mean, last year we beat LSU down in Baton Rouge.
That was awesome.
That was a guarantee game. So that was fun. We beat Georgia Tech one year down there.
We're heading to Duke. We're heading to Duke next week in Virginia Tech. So
oh wow. We're
looking for some upsets.
Yeah, there you go.
I'll be sure to post if you'll know if we beat Duke.
Javante, you can sell anything in that turtleneck, man. You have more swag than the whole rest of us put together. So
I'm building relationships. I don't sell cars.
All right, man. I'll see you guys.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
Thanks, Doc.
Yeah. Bye.